Welcome. My name is Rebecca Haas, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement for Pacific Opera Victoria, and I'll be your host for today's special event. Pacific Opera is delighted to welcome all of you. I believe we have 50 people or so in our Zoom room cocktail party event today. So welcome. We are here to celebrate the Flight of the Hummingbird project and to give a special thank you to all of you, our partners, our supporters, all of you who helped make it possible for us to create this new opera that's been touring for youth and families. Now, of course, we had hoped to see you all in person in March when the Flight of the Hummingbird was to be in the Bauman, but COVID-19 had other plans, and so the show is postponed right now. But while it's on hold, while we wait for Dr. Bonnie Henry to feel that it's safe for us to gather again, we didn't want to miss this opportunity to celebrate, to acknowledge our talented creative team, and to connect with all of you who helped to make this possible with our first attempt at a virtual celebration. Before I introduce our special guests today from the creative team of the opera, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So for those of you who don't spend all your time in Zoom rooms, consider yourself lucky. So if you're not used to doing this, if you look at the bottom of your screen where you have a bit of a control panel, you'll see that there is a chat icon with sort of a comic bubble. That's a great place to interact with other people who are in the room. As I say, there are about 50 of us here. So it's sort of a chance to have cocktail party conversation and react to what you're hearing and seeing and converse with other people who are part of this event. If you hear something in my discussion with the creative team that you'd like to dig further into or a question comes to mind, please use the Q&A function. You can type your question in at any time and we'll be delivering those a little bit later into our program. And just like a cocktail party, we want to start with something rather splashy to kick it all off. And so I'm going to give my technical cue now to Steve Barker to get ready. We have a little video to share. Most of you will not have had the chance to see the Flight of the Hummingbird yet. And so we want to give you a little bit of a taste with a short video with excerpts from the opera. So I'm going to hand it over to Steve to share his screen so you can see the Flight of the Hummingbird.
I've seen many things. I've watched as others fell. What else could I have done?
The message of this, it is a show that is positioned in the context of climate change, as seen through the lens of a forest fire. It's also the power of one, it's a call to action, it's just the difference that one person can make in the world.
Is the sky tumbling? The world about to end? On the laundry day? Wiping dishes, mopping floors, stocking pantries, locking doors. There's so much to do.
The prologue to the Flight of the Hummingbird involves a white ship with reference to smallpox. It is to remind us that historically, when troubled times have come and we've refused to become engaged, that there is a price for that.
I've met many inspiring people who are facing great challenges and who persist in keeping our one world safe. Wow!
There's something about this story that keeps going, and it's not my story. It's our story. It's a collective story. It's a story of the moment.
Our hope if lost, our children's cost, our forest in burning.
It was really interesting to write the piece for 4-voice, piano, and cello because most of my work are for orchestra. And I'm used to when I work with orchestra, you can have all these palette of colors. And now I had just 2 instruments and 4 voice. So there was a lot of new challenges.
Who are you?
Don't you recognize us?
fire is not a character in the story. The fire is plays an important part of the story.
Whoa! It's getting so hot! And the air is so smoky and dusty!
So the fire has its own theme also. It's more a very short motif.
Could fierce flames burn away our forest?
As the fire goes on stage, like the theme is taking all over of the music as well.
Fire is here! The fire is here! The fire is here!
We always knew right from the beginning that it was powerful, and all of the creative team knew that we were doing something important. I wish it wasn't at a time when Australia is burning.
Ah! All is lost! Nothing to be done!
I don't believe that!
There's this sense that the story reveals itself when it's needed to be told and needed to be heard.
There must be something, a better way. What can be done? What can I do? A drop of water, I'll do that.
We can't pretend that just because it's not Haida Gwaii that's burning, it's our friends and fellow human beings in Australia facing a horrendous time. That the call to action is powerful and important.
But now we do what we can. The nothing we do is the something undone. Now we do what we can. Now we do what we can. Now we do what we can.
Well, I have to tell you that that brings a lot of memories back for me, because I was lucky enough to see this dress rehearsal in Vancouver before the show went out on tour. And so watching that, I can hardly wait until we're on tour again. Creating an opera is an amazing journey, and it requires extremely committed artists. And really from the beginning, long before you see the singers on the stage, we need people with vision and passion. And I have two of those people with me today. Joining me today on his phone, I believe from the Okanagan, is Michael Nikoyagolanis, co-creator of the libretto and creative designer for the show, which was inspired by his best-selling book, which I have a copy of with me here. I have the big version for my old eyes. The Flight of the Hummingbird, a parable for the environment. Michael is an award-winning visual contemporary artist, author, and a professional speaker, and now an opera creator. And Glynis Lation from her home in Victoria, the dramaturg of this work and the stage director. Glynis has worked around the country in theater and opera and is very well known in both fields, but she's had a particularly long and fruitful relationship with Pacific Opera, and we're delighted she's part of this project. Welcome to both of you.
Good to be here.
You're so welcome. Michael, I'm going to start with you. Operas are built on stories, sometimes novels, sometimes plays, and sometimes new texts. But The Flight of the Hummingbird is a very old story. And I would love it if you would share with everyone the origin of the story and how it came to you, because not only have you created, of course, Haida manga out of it, but you did create an opera. So tell me about the story.
Stories tumble by us all the time, and it's being observant in the moment, so that when this gift comes, as it does to all of us, you react to it. And my reaction to when I first heard the story was based on the experience of working for 27 years in Haida Gwaii in sort of community-based actions, I suppose. Very progressive and very successful in terms of bringing people together Canadians and Indigenous people in really a very positive economic and governance models there. So I was part of a great number of people working on that. I used to take Japanese university students into the forest in Haida Gwaii, and during that came to work with a group of them. We were part of the slow movement in Japan, and one of the campaigns they were doing was candlelight, and which they convinced or asked Japanese citizens to turn the electricity off on June 21st, which they did to such a success that they actually shut down one of the nuclear power reactors in Japan, of which there were 52 at the time. So that was huge impact. We did a little pamphlet, and I illustrated this short little story of the hummingbird, and it went on to do very well. Third bestseller in Japan, Amazon, sold 20,000 copies one day. There was a village where people put signed little pieces of paper committing to doing something, and they pasted it on one of the local temple walls. So I could really feel the gravitas of this story. So I went to South America, to the Altiplano. I was working in a place called Parque de Papa, which is the source of the potato plant. And there the farmers are engaged in protecting the genetic diversity of arguably one of the most important food plants in the world. And there are people who are working against that. So this was small communities, again, as in Haida Gwaii, again, individuals as in Japan. So we produced this story, published this story with Greystone Books. And someone from the Vancouver opera community tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Would you like to do a libretto?" And I thought, sure, I could write something out. And I can remember, still to my enduring shame, going so far as to say to people, well, there it is, there's a libretto, I'll see you opening night. Not realizing the layers and layers of complexity that are involved in this. So realizing what the story was, recognizing it, moving with it so far, and being open to work with team people has made this opera possible. Glynis is a very important part of that. Rebecca, you as well, the Pacific Opera people, the Vancouver Opera, and then just the people who actually put the money together. We're the collective team. We all recognize the value of the story, and that's why we have an opera today.
It's so wonderful how tuned in you were into the moment to know what that story was for now, to grab that moment, because of course it is incredibly relevant. As Glynis mentions in the video, the fires in Australia when we were working on this opera really brought it home to all of us that we don't have any time to waste. And I'm always struck by this story because it feels so universal and so huge, which is what happens to us in global emergency. It feels overwhelming, and yet the basic message of the story is really personal empowerment. And the story has frightening elements, and it's a serious topic. And Glynis, this brings me to you because it's not really built as an opera necessarily just for adults. It's not like we're going to see La Traviata, right, in our velvet seats. This is an opera that was really built to share with families and with children. It means something to adults too. But what is the unique gift or challenge in taking this kind of a story and delivering it to a young audience?
That's a great question, because you are going right into a community, a school, and dealing with an audience that's absolutely honest and absolutely immediate. That audience isn't engaged. They let you know they aren't sitting in those comfortable velvet seats, and there is a distinct sense of needing to capture attention, even in the unpleasant sometimes surrounds of a school gym. So as a creator, I've done a lot of work with young audiences. That's been a gift in my career. I really wanted to make sure that they were engaged in the physicality of the story, as well as the extraordinary music that Maxime created. Obviously, the story itself tells an important story, and that's the gift that Michael gave us all. We needed to tell this story. We're compelled to tell it with really interesting characters, the animal characters that he created for the piece, the bear, the hummingbird herself, fabulous characters, but to give it physical life. So I hope that the video gave a small sense of the physical interaction of the piece and the alive physicality of the piece that has to work closely with the music. It has to be aligned with the music, but ultimately it needs to be able to take an audience from something they may not be used to hearing. The idea of people singing instead of speaking might be a foreign experience, but get to them and allow them to inhabit a world that Michael created that tells such an important story for us all.
Michael, you're new to the world of opera. Yeah, you primarily have worked obviously in visual art forms. I'm sort of reticent to say what do you love about working in opera, but I'm sort of curious about how that's impacted your sense of how a story is told. Because haida manga is also a pretty vibrant way to tell a story, and I like to think opera is that too. But how do you feel about opera as a storytelling device?
Well, there's so many ways to respond to that, and they're all really good. In the course of working with the opera community, I've been able to go backstage. I've been able to see the talent that goes into the construction of the sets. I've filled my mind with music over and over again, which initially was somewhat familiar, but still strange and alien. And I love that which is exotic. I like to be the odd guy out in the group. I thrive on that because it turns off certain parts of the brain and it opens up other parts. The sort of observe and try not to be so self-assured, not try to step back and perhaps try to be a bit more humble. And this has been the experience of working with the opera community in Victoria and Vancouver, is the incredible talent that is coming in. So when we were preparing for this, you were listening to some symphony in the back, and it's either symphony or opera that's playing in the studio all the time. So I'm finding that it's a bit like jet fuel. It's excited me because it's new. And at this age of my life, I think it's a good thing to be excited by that which is new and not to get comfortable and sort of, static and frozen up, but to be open to new challenges. And this certainly has been very challenging, but very inspiring. Again, I think it's the exotics, it's the different language that I'm not that familiar with music. So there's lots of new horizons that have opened up and more to come. I'll stop there.
I say more to come makes me excited because I'm really keen to see what you'll create next. And I know some of your other haida mangas, so that's a pretty thrilling prospect. I have a similar sort of question for you, Glynis, because you come from inside the opera world. But I think this project has probably had a personal impact on you as well. We all take our art home as artists when we work inside of a project, but because this is so socially relevant, and such a different sort of piece to work on, and creating a new opera is different than obviously constructing a historical piece. I'm curious about, what are the personal resonances for you from working on The Flight of the Hummingbird?
Oh, big question. It was funny just seeing that video. I hadn't seen it for a long time, and just seeing my face talking when I was talking about the fires in Australia. And I realized how much the world was inside the room, the very intimate room, the rehearsal room, when we were making this opera, that there wasn't a day where something of relevance didn't impact our experience, and how each of those four very young, very talented singers would bring wonderful musicians that worked with us, Kinza as our music director, and we would share conversation. And sharing conversation with young singers from across the country, come from very different backgrounds, also reminded me over and over again that in conversation that we do what we can, mantra that is the soul, the heart of the piece, became something that was a call to action for me. And without, it just has lived with, this piece has lived with me to an extraordinary degree through the idea of the opening sequence that Michael talked about with the the ship with the smallpox and the idea of living through a pandemic. It's extraordinary to me how much I've learned by being a participant in this process, and how humbling that is, and how one feels one needs to carry that drop of water symbolically that Hummingbird inspired in us all.
It is a pretty amazing thing in a piece of art like this, that we do carry it out of the room with us, and that it does linger with us beyond however we feel about characters in the moment, but with a sense of empowerment, and especially for young people, which is something I really took away from it, that it does matter what each one of us do. So again, I'm sort of playing with that idea of the global, but also the personal in this, and I'll offer to both of you, and you can see who jumps in first, but what are the future hopes for this piece? If this were to succeed in the way that both of you would like, knowing how important this piece is, what would you love to see happen for it? What is the future of the Hummingbird? What do you think? She's pointing at you, Michael.
Oh, okay. Well,
the Zoom point.
Okay, Glynis, I'm going to let you talk about the national potential of the Hummingbird. I think most of us probably know that we're working on a translation right now into German, and that's because there is a conversation going on with Opera Frankfurt. Before COVID, we were going to be doing something in October in Frankfurt. And there's also a conversation going on with the Humboldt Forum in Berlin. So there is interest in this. And I've seen all the way along that there is magic to this piece. People have cried during some of the performances, and people have laughed, and thank goodness they're doing it at the appropriate times. So there is this, it's got something, it's got this magic to it. Now we're in COVID, that's changed everything for us. And what's going through my mind is, are we at a stage where we can actually secure a large main stage with the lighting, with the sound, the technical team? Can we pull together people and do a performance that is recorded with top level professional technicians? What we saw was taped in a rehearsal hall, and with all due respect, the piece can be more powerfully presented if it's pulled together with people who, and you know, the financial resources, let me be so blunt, as to take this 45-minute piece and make it so that it's viewable regardless of COVID-19. It has an international, there is an international audience and appetite for this. I think that we need to see whether we can take this and actually you know, deliver it to people in the safety of their own homes. The other thing that's rolling through my mind is, I think that, I'm just going to say it, in a year and a half, in 2 years, if everything comes together, if there are good friends that all come together, we could probably turn this from a 45-minute piece into a 90-minute piece. It's got enough, there's enough stuff left on the cutting floor in terms of the libretto that we can play with and expand on. Certainly, this piece needs to continue to go somewhere. It's too important. It fits in with too many of the current social challenges that we're dealing with. And the message here is for people to address the challenges, because if we don't address the challenges, there is a guarantee the challenges will grow and the fire will burn the entire forest down. And I think that's where we're at. Thank
you, Michael. That's wonderful. Glynis, what is your wish and hope for the, well, you got a big palette going. You might as well join in.
The team is very much what Michael has articulated. Specifically, we have friends and colleagues at the National Arts Center and who are very interested in the piece, Kevin Loring and Laurie Marchand. And we would very much like to partner with them in a production that takes this piece created on the very West Coast, the edge of one edge of our country, and take it to central Canada. It's a story that many producers have expressed interest in, and that's exciting. That it finds a home with other artists is always exciting and always good. But that extended version, I think Michael's right. It's a graceful and elegant parable that has such depth that without in any way blowing it up or making it something it isn't, I think there's a life to the piece that can extend beyond the current 45-minute version.
It's really exciting for me to look at my operatic field and know that it's a living and breathing thing, and that it makes a social difference, and pieces like this are hugely important. I love this as a piece of theater and as a piece of music. I feel like I've hogged you long enough and I've got to ask some of my questions. I am going to open it up. We have Steve Barker from our development team, who has a beautiful bass baritone voice, and he's going to share some questions with us that are showing up in our Q&A. And if you're in the chat room and you've been shy, don't be shy. Please ask questions. There's lots of areas we didn't explore in this, and these are two amazing people to have a chance to speak with. Steve, what do you have? What do people want to know?
Oh, thanks so much. For all of you who are considering asking a question, just use your mouse to navigate towards the bottom of your screen and click on the Q&A button to submit. I have one here already from our own Yvette Gigono, who says that she felt shocked by the images of the smallpox seen in the film clip we all shared. Why did you choose to include these in the story, and how does this relate to the greater piece?
Wow, yes, that is. So in my own family, we remember the people who survived the smallpox epidemics that struck the Haida Nation. Particularly two young girls who, if they had not been whisked off the beach to safety, many Haidas, a great portion of the Haida Nation would not be here, because they turned out to be grandmothers of a very populous lineage. The question I've always asked myself is, have we as Indigenous people survived 151 years of assault in the Canadian experience to do what? We're not here for revenge. We're not here for retribution. We survived to overcome the challenge, to try and humanize that relationship between indigeneity and Canada to such an extent that these kind of horrific assaults can't happen anymore. That's always in my mind. It's not a mantra, but I'm always conscious that I can't get really upset about something. I can't get angry. I can't strike out at all the things that bother me from time to time. And goodness knows, I think most of us have things these days that really disturb us. We've seen some things in the media as of late, the systemic racism. If we can't strike out to it, we can't fall into that violence. So it's reminding myself not to fall into the attack or to fall into the fear that generates the attack, but how do we move beyond it? That piece, the prologue, reminds us we can survive the pandemic. We can do it. It has been done, and we will do it again. I'll stop there. That, we could go on for great length at that, but that was a very good question. It goes quite deep. It's quite personal. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Yvette. Oh, thank you, Glynis.
I just to add to that, that's wonderful words, Michael, as always. I also think in that prologue, which is what you saw, what perhaps was missing in the clip was the story sense. And in the story of the opera, the owl character watches and sees the pandemic, sees the boat, and runs in fear. And the journey that Owl takes is the important journey that we all go on in the opera, in that he watches the hummingbird when the fire happens, and instead of running away, the hummingbird does what she can. And that's the lesson he learns. So the prologue takes one horrific experience and moment and contextualizes it through the eyes of the character of the owl. And I think that's an important element, that it wasn't just a single event, but rather ties into the main story.
Thank you very much. I have another question here from an anonymous attendee who asks, what is an example of something that was left on the cutting room floor from the libretto when making this opera?
Oh,
Glynis, you know me. Oh, goodness.
There were many rich stories, ideas. One of the ones that comes most immediately to mind is you saw a little moment of a song of persistence, which is an anthem that Michael, very powerful anthem that Marion Barry and Michael created. We had to condense that down to 3 verses within the context of a show that lasts 45 minutes. That piece, I can say, in opera context, that piece could have been 15 minutes and still resonate with stories that it shares of Indigenous people throughout the world and their experience. So that many important and powerful verses and great stories got left on the cutting room floor. And that's one of the things that we would love to explore: relationships between the animals, their partnership, their fears, all had to be streamlined. And there's rich material there that I don't think we have to create new stories per se, but enrich what is already there.
And in addition, there's, which we haven't seen in the little video clip we saw, the crows.
Yeah.
We have a couple of crows there, and they're packing, 3 crows, they're packing the weight of so much story. There is so much potential for a chorus there, for us to examine what happens when we respond to challenges by isolating ourselves into smaller groups and sort of disassembling the bigger structure of society, gangs, if you will, people who are perhaps have some unfriendly natures and expressions about them. We need to examine that as well, so that the story isn't simply, here's a challenge and here's 1 or 2 ways to respond to it. It's a very complex situation. So we were examining a multitude of responses to the challenges. And I think the crows were a pretty good illustration of how we had to really crunch things down for 45 minutes.
Thanks once more. I have 3 or 4 more questions queued up here, and I'll continue in. Heather Clark asks, she's wondering if you could comment on working on a collaborative project between Pacific Opera Victoria and Vancouver Opera.
Zooming to Glynis first, or?
Sure. I'm having worked in theater and shared the experience of working with various theater companies on creation. I'm really excited that idea, that very Canadian sense of collaboration has extended into the world of opera and opera creation. It's an extraordinary thing to do. It's costly, it's on many levels, it requires many resources, human and financial. So the idea of sharing in the development of something and using all of those many talents that come from both companies and can be pooled in terms of resources. The set and the costumes that Michael created were built in Victoria, Pacific Opera's design studio, but we rehearsed in Vancouver at their wonderful opera center. So there was a wonderful sense of collaboration. We knew that we would have a sense of being able to take this, we thought we could take it to schools throughout British Columbia. So the idea of the synergy of both companies working on something they truly believed in was effective, I thought. And there's always challenges in collaboration, but it was a very harmonious meeting of 2 companies and a group of creative artists.
I don't have any experience, previous experience, so I wouldn't know I was surprised that Pacific Opera and Vancouver have perhaps not worked together previously on such an opera, but someone can correct me. I understand there's some nuance there, but it seemed quite seamless. But for me, what was not surprising about it was what this story is doing. This story, as I mentioned, did well in Japan. It's an altiplano story. This particular expression of the story is indigeneity in Canada, in British Columbia, which has got a long history of problematic relationships with the landscape and indigenous peoples that we're working through. So the story is about collaboration. It is about people pulling together, and it was no surprise to me that it would be Pacific Opera and Vancouver Opera, and it will be no surprise to me if it is National Arts in Ottawa, nor a surprise when the Humboldt Forum in Berlin steps up, or Frankfurt and beyond. I was in Ukraine in the fall working on some exhibition possibilities there, and I was welcome to have a conversation with Ukraine Opera once we had worked out the things that we're doing here. So it would be surprising to me if the rings didn't continue going out. And again, this isn't author ego. This is our story. And there's something about it that's really deep and just naturally pulls people together. So I'm not surprised to have seen the experience. Surprised that perhaps the collaborative experience has not been as commonplace as it is now with the Flight of the Hummingbird.
Thank you once more.
Steve, just before you go to the next question, I just wondered, I know lurking in the background here, we have Timothy Vernon also in the room for this, and I wonder if he wants to speak to the collaboration as the artistic director of the company.
Our king?
Would you like to offer something to that conversation?
I do have something to say, and that is that, you know, the Flight of the Hummingbird has something in common with the Marriage of Figaro, and with La Bohème, and with Wozzeck, and that is, it has a composer. It's music. And I just want to put that name into the conversation because it was such a great part of the experience. I wasn't in the thick of it with the rest of you, but I had a chance to observe its development. It was my great privilege to find the composer for this wonderful text. And I felt that in Maxime Goulet, we found an ideal collaborator. I couldn't know that in advance, but in fact, he was inventive. He was completely understanding of the situation. He was responsive. He was reactive. He didn't own every blessed 16th note that he composed. When he saw something had to change, he was there. He was ready. He was supportive. And he contributed, I think, enormously, because one of the things I wanted to have happen with this piece is that people leave the room, the kids, leave the room with something to hum, because that makes text memorable. The way that sometimes by itself, it may not have the same presence in our imagination and memory. It was my privilege to see the very first performance before an audience, which was also the dress rehearsal. And this was an audience of kids of a range of ages, but exactly the range that have subsequently seen it on tour. And the response was wonderful. It was spontaneous, it was engaged, it was warm, it was everything you could want. And my understanding is in the course of the rest of the touring, it has been that way. I think stressing that it's for young people is also important because in our youth, we see the future not just of the world, which we're all worried about right now, but of the art, which some of us can still care about very deeply and see it moving forward and see the traditions going forward and see a desire and a hunger for the kind of synthesis that art and opera in particular can offer to our experience of the world. And of course, the theme, as has been touched on by both Michael and Glynis, both wonderful, wonderful people and wonderful collaborators, is that it's a message that can move with the time, because is there ever a time in the world when we're not without need, when we don't need to address something, when there isn't something probably of our own creation that we need to fix. And so the idea of doing what you can is a marvelous and universal message. We're all trying, I mean, those who are trying to do something about the coronavirus are doing it. But the other great rupture, the other great forest fire, which is raging around the world right now, is the lancing of a huge boil, the boil of racism and all its ugliness. And the only cure for those sorts of things is to shine a light, as strong a light as we can on it. And with the idea of doing what we can, it brings it home. It makes sure that even as a child, there's a sense of personal responsibility and personal engagement. And I think that's one of the gifts of this piece.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Timothy, for those words. And I know that I'm actually going to have a chance to speak to one of the teachers yet before we part ways here, who had the show at her school. But before I do that, I feel like, Steve, do you have one more question you'd like to squeeze in before I move on?
I do. Thank you for asking. And my apologies to those of you who asked questions who we weren't able to address. There's one here that I do really want to share to our panelists. John Barth asks, how can viewers of this webinar help move the project along?
It's a great question. Michael, I think I'm going to look at you.
Oh, okay. You know, it's a bit of magic to me with my limited experience in opera, how this works. And but one thing that I know in broad brushstrokes is it takes people to financially stand up. That the cost of working on an opera, it's taken 45 minutes to 90, for instance. We're assuming that's a 2-year project in itself, and that's a number of people working simultaneously. So I think that people who have stepped up so far have really hopefully concede that the value of their contribution has been achieved or met, that there's a cause for celebration and success, and perhaps maybe consider, let's see if we can actually bring this to another level and make this sort of British Columbia's gift to the world, if you will. So I think there's that financial possibility. The other thing I think that's important is we should be talking about this. We should be talking about how, as Timothy was talking about, how music and the arts really work as a social instrument of change in a very loving and welcome way. So I think even if we can't step up financially, I think we can be talking about the message and how it's worked. You see children laughing and crying, and teachers crying as well at these performances. We've got something very wonderful here. We have a treasure, so we just need to respect that and sort of share the message of people doing what they can and not losing hope in these times. That's very important.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Glynis, as well. And thank you, Timothy, for popping in. I'm going to just move us, because this is such a beautiful segue. I'm going to go to one of the teachers from one of the schools that hosted Flight of the Hummingbird. We have 2 teachers with us today. We have Haley Gallup from Craig Flower Elementary and Christine Kosolowski from Happy Valley Elementary. I remember that. I should, because you welcome us with our living opera all the time. So you're a great supporter of Pacific Opera. Christine, I would love to have a few words from you. We've been talking about the piece and the hoped for impact of the piece. What was it like for your students, and what was the conversation in the room like after they saw the Flight of the Hummingbird this spring?
They were so excited to actually have seen. We talked a lot about it and what sort of the story to expect, and we'd taken a look at Michael's book beforehand, and so to actually see it come to life was really something. I think what Glynis spoke to about earlier in terms of the honest reaction of the students is so true. And that, you know, when you've got 400 students sitting on the cold gym floor and, you know, their attention is rapt and they're laughing and they're, you know, enjoying the music that they're hearing. Many of the students even I spoke with some of them just last week, and for them, it's been over 3 months since they've seen the piece and students. And so I was asking them what they remembered, and they were so excited that I'd have a chance to sort of share some of their impressions. And one of them was, you know, it was amazing. And, you know, they loved the set and the costumes and how detailed everything was. And one of them said it shocked me when the trees fell over and then turned into burning trees. And they were just amazed by the reversal of the disc in the center of the set, going from the water drop into the world to the fire, and all those little pieces that, you know, even just they loved how there were ladders behind the trees. It was so it looked that the animals could climb up the trees and things like that. So it was just the fact that they remembered so many details even after such a time. And the message, you know, one of the students said that the message that it was teaching was really important, you know, and so they really appreciated that, you know, that sometimes I think the problems of the world seem very big to them. And so knowing that they can do something, you know, that idea of doing what they can is, you know, one of them said, sometimes you just need to take matters into your own hands, you know, so, and to try and make a better world. And, you know, like that's exactly the inspiration that I love to have going to, for our students to have and to remember and to, you know, be inspired by going forward, and to have it being done with such beautiful music and with, you know, as Timothy mentioned, that the songs that they're humming on the way out and things like that, they make such a deep impression. So.
Thank you so much, Christine. It's so wonderful to feel like we're in the room and actually hear what you're hearing from students. And I have to laugh because I think when you say they can feel overwhelmed by the world, I have felt very overwhelmed by the world quite a lot lately. So it's interesting, right? We think that it's so different from children, and yet I think on the inside, we still all know what that feeling is, that it's challenging, and it makes such a difference to have something inspirational that helps direct us and support us as we move forward. So thank you so much for your words today. I really appreciate you coming and joining the webinar, and thank you also to Haley for being with us today. Well, it's time for me to take a moment to celebrate all the people who make this possible for us. Obviously, this kind of work cannot be produced without the trust, enthusiasm, and financial support of so many individuals, businesses, foundations. Many of you who are with us today have invested in this project when it was in its earliest stages, and we are so very grateful that you walked this path with us to help us bring this path to fruition. And it was really exciting today to hear that we have further to go yet, which is pretty wonderful. I understand that one of our sponsors is here today, Kathy Bond, Senior Community Investment Manager from the TELUS Community Board, and we want to give you a special shout out and thank you for attending today and for your support. And of course, to all of you who bring these projects forward and support Pacific Opera. I have a little gift thing to do, so maybe I will go to that and then I'll let Timothy say a few more words to close us out. So when you RSVP'd, you were automatically entered into a draw. We have 10 copies of this book to offer, The Flight of the Hummingbird, written and illustrated by Michael Nikolagolanis. And so I'm very excited to say who the winners are. Margaret Lucas, Nancy Wu, Haley Gallup from Craig Flower Elementary, Herb Weil, Susan Johnson, Mary A. Kennedy, Peter Bray, Edith Newman, Beverly Unger, and Barbara Schumacher. If you heard your name, then you can look forward to checking your mailbox for something other than a bill, and you'll be receiving a copy of this book. We're going to use the address we have on file. If you want it to go somewhere else, please just give us a phone call or send us an email, and we'll send it wherever you would like it to go. I want to say a very special thank you to our panelists today from the creative team, to Michael Nikolagolanis for making time for us, and Glynis Lation as well. A special thank you to our teacher, Christine Kosolowski, and Haley Gallup, who joined us. And I would like to offer a final word from Timothy Vernon, our founding artistic director of Pacific Opera. Timothy, what would you like to offer as we close today?
Well, just participating as I have for the last hour and a bit, I'm reminded of how much we owe to the creativity in minds of people like Michael and Glynis, and your to yourself, Rebecca, because people should know that nobody's done more to keep Pacific Opera's presence during this dreadful period. No one has done more than Rebecca has. It's been quite astonishing, the amount of material. Some of you have participated and you know that. I like to think of this event and this work that we're discussing as an important chapter in a company's history that continues to evolve in good and positive directions. We have a lot to learn from every experience, and we certainly learned a lot from the process of bringing Flight of the Hummingbird to be. And what its future fate will be, we'll learn even more from that. And I would like to use that knowledge, what we have learned, to push us forward, to think further into the field. What more can we do to bring younger people to this fantastic art form? What more can we do to alert everyone, now that we have a chance to get over the barriers of going into a dark theater, presumably having to dress up and know different languages, and I don't know what all that goes on, because of course I'm so far, those considerations are so far in my past, but I know for many people, they're of vital concern. I think we have an opportunity here. I think the great leveler of the coronavirus has sort of, as well as closing a lot of doors, it's opened a lot of others. And I would love to see us take advantage of it, as we have this afternoon. So thank everyone who's been involved in this. Thank you again, Michael. God bless, and Glynis.
Thank you, Timothy. Thank you everyone for joining us. It's just been, even virtually, it's nice to gather and talk about this project. It really is innovating to have a conversation about art again and to gather with our donors and supporters. So hooray for us, we've done our first Zoom webinar cocktail party thing. So until I see you all again in person in the Bauman, hopefully watching the Flight of the Hummingbird, I want to say thank you for joining us today. And in the words of Dr. Henry, in the meantime, be kind, be calm, and be safe. Until we meet again, thanks everybody.
Thank you all.